When you have kids, specifically daughters, it's really hard for a father to say no when they ask you for something. So, after building a dining table for my oldest daughter, my youngest daughter asked for a home office desk, and then followed by another request to make her a desk organizer. Of course I said no, which of course is why you're seeing me in a video about building a desk organizer. The sample picture she sent me was kind of blah, just a rectangular storage box with a drawer, so I thought I could spice that up a bit. I had some leftover 3/4 inch red oak from her desk build, but that would wind up being too thick for what I had in mind. I cut those planks down to manageable sized blocks and then went over to the bandsaw to split that thickness in two, giving me boards that were about 5/16 of an inch thick. Since those pieces were only about 5.5 inches wide, I had to cut some clean 90-degree edges and then glue those boards together to get me the wider pieces I'd need for construction. For certain pain-in-the-butt jobs like gluing thin panels together, I like to find little woodshop tricks that make my life easier. So to help hold down thin panels that just like to explode apart during clamping, I'll lay them out across a sheet of melamine, add some painter's tape to protect the clamp from glue, and then put the clamp's steel bar side down. That'll put the straight edge weight across the top of all those panels while the clamp pulls the edges together. After the glue dried, I had a nice set of thin panels to work with, though they're going to need a bit of love over on the belt sander to remove any excess glue. Then I made some rough cuts to bring the panels down to a 10.25 inch working height. The sides to the box I'm going to cut down to a width of 6.5 inches. At the end of the video, I'll tell you how you can find a set of finished drawings for this project. They're free and easy to get. Stick around. When the glue had dried, I figured it was time to get rid of those ugly square box dimensions, so I decided to make a 40-degree cut on the face of the organizer, still leaving enough flat space on the bottom to accommodate a 2-inch deep slide-out drawer. Measuring out about 1.5 inches of space between what will wind up being vertical walls to divide paper and stuff, I set up a dado stack of saw blades to cut a channel for those vertical dividers. I also cut in a dado to hold the top frame of the drawer box, and that'll give the whole structure some more rigidity. I almost started to grab the glue to assemble those dado joints, but then realized I'd have a pretty rough time trying to get the stain on the inside of any of those deep bins. So I stopped and decided to grab my sander, and I gave the panels a once-over down to 220 grit. Normally I hate to stain any hardwood, but the gray tone of the stain is going to match the color my daughter chose for her desktop. I mentioned in the desk build how much I'm not really liking this water-based stain, so I had to wipe it off immediately after application like I was supposed to, and then I would wind up touching up some spots after the fact. After grabbing some cheese to go with that wine, I let the stain dry and then started to get set up for a glue up. Tape helps hold the parts together until you can get all the pieces fitting tightly inside those dado joints. Then it was just some patience, biting my tongue along the way and getting the core of the box assembled so that I could pull everything together with some clamps. At this point, it was time to take a break, step outside on a sunny afternoon, and check out how my windmills are doing in the gusty winds. The next day, I prepared some 1/8" dowels to help secure the mitered corners of the main structure. I thought the glued dado joints might actually hold the whole thing together, but the dowels are going to be cheap insurance. Holes were drilled and dowels were hammered and then trimmed off with a flush cut saw. This feature is a little out of sequence, but I had an extra piece of white ash that I decided to add as a pen holder, and while the main box was still clamped up, I shaped it and stained it to fit on the right side corner. It'll be perfect for pens and highlighters. I also had an oops that you never want to show on camera, but I accidentally bashed one corner of a side panel, breaking off the pointy end. So I decided to take an extra pass on the table saw and trim off the damage, and then I'll have to touch up the stain afterwards. Hey, it happens. All that was left was everything else, namely the drawer assembly. I had enough thin-cut oak left to act as the drawer frame, so I cut down that material into a box that just fit inside the dimensions of the drawer opening. I also chose to miter those corners to give me a clean edge, where I'll add some splines after the drawer box is fully assembled. I had another problem to solve too. I really didn't have any other thin, flat material to serve as the drawer's floating bottom, so I improvised a little by making it from a piece of notebook cardboard that I'm going to reinforce with epoxy. It'll wind up being thin enough to slide into a rabbited slot on the drawer box when cut with my table saw blade. I also added a 1/2" opening that allows for a charging cable or even a full-width USB cable to pass through if needed. The small wood ledge that I added can also accommodate a tablet across the front too. And of course there's a place for pens or highlighters. I had to wait overnight for the epoxy to harden, but that seemed to work really well on the cardboard. It was trimmed down to fit inside the drawer frame, and the corners were glued up and held together with more painter's tape. Four hours later, I peeled off that tape and moved the box frame over to the table saw, and yet another helpful little jig to hold the box steady so that I can cut in some splines. Well, you know, forgive the poor attempt at comedy, but a cheesy little homemade tool like this really does help in the woodshop. The jig held the box frame steady and square, and the saw blade was just set high enough to make a cut that wouldn't run through the inside corner of the box. Some splines were prepped and then sanded down to fit snugly into those cuts, and then they were glued into place. They were then trimmed down with a flush cut saw to smooth out the exterior of the box frame. Off camera, I had to do a little sanding of that box frame to make sure that it slid into the opening smoothly, but then prepared the drawer face for gluing onto the frame. For the drawer pull, I thought about using some store-bought hardware, but accidentally ran across some leftover textured oak dowels and thought that one of those would actually look pretty cool as a drawer pull. So there, job done. I cut the drawer face to fit just over the outer dimensions of the organizer and then up to the lip of the flat storage tray. The finished organizer works really well for holding paper or notepads or bills or invoices or envelopes, rulers or pens or whatever. It also does hold the right angle for setting up a cell phone for a call and manages to hold a tablet upright for presentations or training sessions. So I guess in the end it can handle a little bit of old school home office business as well as some new school technology needs. And it manages to match the colors of my daughter's desk project too. Anything, well, almost anything, to make my daughters happy. I mentioned earlier that there were free measurements and drawings available, and you can find that direct link in the video description. Or visit thefamilywoodworker.com and click on the Free Stuff tab to see our free plans. Hey everybody, thanks very much for watching. We don't sell memberships or ask for Patreon money. Subscribing and giving us a like on the video is the thing that really does help us out the most. We appreciate it. Take care.